Les habla Oscar Avendaño de Experience Solutions Canadá. Quiero compartir con ustedes que hemos incluido un nuevo servicio para ti: financiamiento de vehículos nuevos y usados. Sí, escuchaste bien. Enfocados en ti, nuevos inmigrantes, estudiantes internacionales o cualquier residente ya establecido con o sin crédito. Toda situación migratoria será atendido. Por favor, llámanos al 905-920-2143 y comienza a conducir tu carro ahora.
Okay, 1 minute, 1 minute. Ton cardio de la journée. Ton cardio de la journée. Heads up.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here today. Today really is an important day as we announce the next step in our government's plan to support Canadians through this pandemic. As the Prime Minister said several weeks ago, our plan includes a seamless transition to EI, coupled with the creation of new benefits to ensure that no Canadian worker is left behind. Notre objectif pendant cette transition entre l'urgence et la reprise est d'apporter aux travailleurs canadiens la certitude et le confort sur lequel ils pourront compter à plus long terme. Quelle que soit l'étape ou la phase de reprise dans laquelle se trouve la collectivité, nous ne laisserons personne de côté. We also recognize that there continues to be an ongoing public health crisis in our country, and we need to prepare for other possible economic shutdowns due to outbreaks or future COVID-19 waves. Not all regions across the country or sectors are reopening at the same time, and this has had a direct impact on our businesses, on the availability of work, and on people's jobs. The reopening of daycares and back-to-school plans also vary significantly across the country, and parents are worried about both the health and safety of their kids, as well as their own availability for work. There's no denying that the Canada Emergency Response Benefit has helped millions of Canadians. Canadians have confidence in this program. It's been a lifeline for many people and has been monumental in our country's efforts to slow the spread of the virus, keeping Canadians safe and supporting our economy. To provide certainty and continuity, we are announcing today that Canadians will have access to an additional 4 weeks of CERB for a total of 28 weeks. For Canadian families who rely on the CERB, this means that they'll be supported as they figure out what's happening with school and daycare for their kids in the fall. I'll now share with you the details of our transition from the CERB to EI, which will come into effect on September 27th. To begin, because of the impact of COVID-19 and because of the impact it had on the job market, we recently set a minimum national unemployment rate of 13.1% to standardize access to EI regular benefits across the country. This set the eligibility criteria for EI regular benefits at the lowest entry threshold possible. But even doing this, we know many Canadian workers will still not have the hours required to be eligible for EI. That's why we're announcing today a one-time top-up of insurable hours to Canadians applying for EI regular and special benefits. Canadians accessing regular benefits for job loss will receive a credit of 300 hours, and Canadians accessing special benefits, including sickness, maternity, and parental benefits, will receive a credit of 480 hours. This means that millions of Canadians will only need 120 hours to access any EI benefit. I want to highlight the importance of these changes for expectant and new parents, mothers in particular. Many parents have not been able to accumulate the work hours necessary to claim EI maternity or parental benefits. With this one-time credit of 480 insurable hours, parents will have access to these benefits. And we're making this credit retroactive so that parents can claim these benefits starting March 15th, 2020. This one change alone will make a big difference in the lives of many Canadians. Depuis le premier jour, notre gouvernement s'est engagé à traiter tous les travailleurs de manière juste et fairly. Et la démarche de relance économique que
And
nous
our
adoptons
approach
n'est
to
plus
economic
différente.
recovery is no
Nous
different.
savons que malgré les
We know
mesures
that
dont je viens de
despite the measures
parler,
that I just
il y a
spoke about,
toujours des
there will
Canadiens
still
qui
be
n'auront pas
Canadians who
assez
will not
d'heures de
have
travail
enough working
pour avoir
hours
droit à
to
l'assurance
be
emploi
admissible
ou
for
qui ne
employment
relèvent pas du
insurance,
régime
or
d'assurance
who do
emploi,
not fall under the
comme les
employment
travailleurs
insurance regime,
indépendants
like
et les travailleurs à la demande.
self-employed individuals or
For those
those
workers,
working in the gig
we are
economy.
announcing the creation of 3 new benefits. First, the Canada Recovery Benefit for self-employed workers and workers not eligible for EI in the amount of $400 per week. Second, the Canada Recovery Caregiving Benefit for eligible Canadians who are unable to work because they need to provide care or support for a child, family member, or dependent in the amount of $500 per week. And third, the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit for workers who are unable to work because they are sick or have to self-isolate for reasons related to COVID-19 in the amount of $500 per week. Both the recovery benefit and the caregiving benefit will be available for up to 26 weeks over a 1 year period, and the sickness benefit will be available for 2 one-week periods over the year. We intend to introduce legislation in the first week of our return to Parliament to create these benefits and ensure that Canadians have the financial support they need. For the millions of Canadian workers who will have access to EI because of these changes, we want to assure you that there'll be equity between the EI program and the recovery benefits. We'll be establishing a minimum EI benefit amount of $400 per week to ensure that no one on EI is receiving less than someone receiving the recovery benefit. En étant de la système de l'assurance emploi,
When you're in the
vous aurez
employment insurance
accès à des
system,
possibilités
you
de
will have
formation,
access to training
des
opportunities,
incentives au travail
work
et la
incentives,
possibilité
and
de
the
travailler
opportunity
pendant
to
une
work
période
while
de
under
prestation.
claim.
For Canadian workers receiving the recovery benefit, we will work to ensure that you too have access to training, and will introduce a modified working while on claim approach to earned income while on the benefit. Nous savons que les Canadiens sont
We know that
impatients de
Canadians are
retourner au
eager to
travail.
return to work.
Déjà, plus de
Already,
4,1
over
millions de
4.1
personnes de la
million
PCU sont
served
retournées sur
beneficiaries
le marché
have
du
returned
travail.
to the workforce,
Et nous nous attendons
and
à ce
we
qu'il y ait
expect
encore
there to
tous
be
les
even
mois
more
dans les
people
mois
in
de
the coming
venir.
months.
Nous allons
We will
continuer
continue
d'être là
to
pour
be
tous
there
les
for all
travailleurs
Canadian
canadiens.
workers.
With the additional weeks of CERB, the transition to EI, the uniform unemployment rate and credit of insurable hours, and the creation of 3 new recovery benefits, we're doing our very best to support all Canadian workers and leave no one behind. Thank you very much. Madame?
Thank you, Carla. Bonjour tout le monde.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, our government has had 2 overarching objectives. First, to protect and preserve the lives and health of Canadians. And second, to protect and preserve Canadian businesses, Canadian jobs, and our economy. 2 programs, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, have been the bedrock of our economic response. These programs have allowed tens of thousands of employers to continue paying their furloughed workers and to keep people working who may otherwise have lost their jobs. And they've allowed millions of workers who've lost their jobs due to COVID-19 to keep supporting their families and to help pay for things like groceries and the rent. Reuters today published a story with the headline, Canada's economic growth seen outpacing US as virus containment pays off. The fact is that by doing the right thing to protect our health, we are also supporting our economy. And the inverse is also true. By supporting Canadians who are out of work because of the pandemic, we are making it possible for our country to continue to practice social distancing and to do the right thing in the fight against the coronavirus. As we shift from our initial emergency response to a safe and prudent restart, as we shift to living with COVID-19, our approach also needs to evolve. And that's why Minister Qualtrough and I, Carla and I, are here today. In addition to the new benefits she has just described and that she's been working on for a while, we are also announcing reforms to employment insurance. EI is critical to our economy. Canadians rely on this program to get through difficult times when they've lost their jobs through no fault of their own. EI also provides support for workers who must temporarily leave their jobs in order to take care of a child, care for a loved one, or retrain. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, many workers have lost their jobs or worked greatly reduced hours, which might make them ineligible for EI. We recognize that, so we're going to make it easier for Canadians to get EI support. À compter du 27 septembre,
From September 27, a one-time top-up of insurable hours will help Canadians access EI. This top-up will also apply retroactively to EI parental, maternity, compassion, family assistance benefits that don't establish the benefits from March 15th, 2020 to September 26th, 2020 because of not working enough hours. This means that most Canadians who have worked during the qualification period will receive employment insurance. This will mean that more Canadians will receive employment insurance fairly across the country. Furthermore, we are managing the pay-in to EI for 2020 at the same level. So that means that workers will continue to benefit from payments into the EI system at the level that existed in 2020, namely $1.58 of every $100 of insurable salary. That's the lowest level since 1980. Furthermore, the payment rate for employers will be frozen at $2.21 per $100 of insurable salary. This will stimulate major economic growth. Thanks to this freeze, over the next 2 years, workers and employers will save over $2 billion.
Beginning September 27th, a temporary one-time credit of insurable hours will help Canadians claim EI benefits. This credit will also apply retroactively to claimants for EI maternity, paternal, compassionate care, family caregiver, or work-sharing benefits who could not establish their claim for EI from March 15, 2020 to September 26, 2020 due to not having worked enough hours. Very simply, this means that most Canadians who worked during the qualifying period will now be able to claim EI. We are also going to freeze EI premium payments at 2020 levels for 2 years. That means workers will continue to benefit from the employment insurance premium rate at 2020 level of $1.58 per $100 of insurable earnings, the lowest level since 1980. The rate for employers will also be frozen at $2.21 per $100 of insurable earnings. That is also the lowest level since 1980. This measure, in and of itself, constitutes a significant economic boost. The total savings to workers and employers, thanks to this freeze, are estimated to be greater than $2 billion over 2 years. This will make it easier for Canadian businesses and for Canadian workers to get back to work in this difficult time. We want to encourage Canadian businesses to hire back their workers rather than to spend their money paying higher EI premiums. And Canadian businesses, please use this saved money to hire back some of your excellent and beloved workers. So let's be clear. We have had some success at flattening the curve of the pandemic, but we're not out of the woods yet. And we are contending with the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. At the beginning of this crisis, our government promised to do whatever it takes to support Canadian workers and to support Canadian businesses. That is what we're doing today and what we promise to continue to do. Thank you very much. Carla and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. Merci. We'll now proceed to questions from the media. We'll start with 3 questions on the phone, then take questions in the room. 1 question, 1 follow-up. Operator, over to you.
Thank you. Merci. Our first question is from Jordan Press from the Canadian Press.
Well, hi, good afternoon, ministers. I wanted to just ask, you're making these changes that are going to put a heavy burden, first off, on the EI system, and also are only going to be in place, really, as you say, for about 1 year. So I'm curious if first the EI system can actually handle all of this for the next year, and if you're essentially saying that after this year is over, that things are going to be better, and maybe we won't need these changes anymore.
Thank you for the question, Jordan. We have spent the last 3.5, 4 months preparing the EI system for this very moment. We learned very quickly in March that the EI system couldn't take in the number of applicants we were looking at supporting. And I am absolutely confident now, after having automated a bunch of our processes, simplified others, and streamlined others, that the EI system is more than ready to take in the approximate 3 million people we believe will go into the EI system at the end of September.
Follow-up?
And so just as a follow-up, just to go back on then, for the 1 year time frame, can you just explain why this is only going to be in place for 1 year and not maybe for longer, given that there's some estimates that we could still be in a recovery beyond the end of next year?
Really important question, Jordan. Thank you. So we have put in place the 1 year time frame to give Canadians a longer view of the support they'll be receiving. We've been announcing CERB extensions in additional weeks, kind of around the 2 to 4 month mark. And we recognize that Canadians can now benefit from more certainty and more continuity. We don't know what the world's going to look like in a year. And part of what you'll hear in our speech from the throne on the 23rd, and what I've been tasked to do by the Prime Minister, is to look at what's been identified within the EI system as significant systemic gaps, and to look at designing or changing the system to better respond to the way Canadians work now and the way we anticipate they'll continue to work in the future. If there's anything this pandemic has shown us, is that our EI system hasn't kept up with the way work has evolved, and we now have a chance to fix that for the better. OK, on a choisi de 1 an.
We chose the 1 year period
laissons ces prestations disponibles à Canadiens parce que nous savons que les Canadiens
benefits, because we know that Canada deserves
long temps de certitude
a greater period of certainty for their lives. We know that, well, we don't know what the world will look like in 1 year, but we know that our EI system does not work for all Canadians, for all workers, and the way we work in Canada. The EI system has not kept up. That's the system that we have now, and we use it as much as possible, and it is ready to accept the roughly 3 million individuals who will be added to the system in a month, but we know that we can do better, and we can change the system to incorporate more workers and be more inclusive.
Merci.
Thank you.
Nous allons prendre la prochaine question.
Operator will now take the next question.
Merci. La prochaine question vient de Michel Lamarche de
The
TVA.
next question is from Michel Lamarche.
Oui, bonjour. Très rapidement,
Yes,
Madame
good
Qualtrough,
afternoon, Ms.
vous
Qualtrough.
venez
Very
parler de
quickly,
3 millions
you
de
spoke about 3
travailleurs dans
million
le
workers
système dans un
in
mois.
the system in
Si
1
on
month.
prend en
If you
considération
take into
qu'il y a
consideration the
actuellement
fact that
encore
there
sur
are
la
currently
PCU
still on
4,5
CERB
millions Canadiens,
4.5 million Canadians,
qu'est-ce qui vous fait dire là, que
what
dans un mois,
makes you
on
think
est
that
à
in 1
3
month
millions? Ça pourrait
we
être
will be
beaucoup
down to
plus.
3 million? It could be much more than that, could it not?
Excuse la confusion.
I'm sorry for the confusion. What I wanted to say is that there are now 4.5 million people on CERB. About 3 million of these individuals will enter the employment insurance system. The other 1.2 to 5 million people will be in the new recovery benefit. So we hope, we believe that 4.4 million people will be covered by either EI or the new recovery benefit.
Suivi?
Follow-up?
Bien sûr.
Yes.
Vous aurez donc pour les prestations
For
spéciales à
the
faire
special
passer une
benefits,
loi au
you will have
Parlement
to
en
adopt
revenant
a bill
après
in
le discours
Parliament
Trump.
after the throne
Expliquez-nous ce
speech.
qui se
Can you
passe
explain
si
to us what will
vous
happen
perdez
if
lors du discours du Trône, que vous
you lose
n'obtenez pas la
confidence in the throne
confiance des
speech
partis
and you
d'opposition?
do not
Il
maintain
n'y
the
a pas
confidence
de
of the opposition
programme pour des
parties?
millions de Canadiens, c'est ça?
There's no program for millions of Canadians then? Is that right? We have a lot of confidence that after working very closely with the opposition parties on CERB and the student benefit, we will achieve a broad consensus with the other parties. All of the changes to employment insurance will be made. There's no legislation for those to help those 3 million people. For the others, of course, we will try to find another way, but I don't think that we should speculate at this point. We have worked very closely with the opposition parties on other benefits. We all agree that this is still a crisis, a public health crisis, and an economic crisis. I am confident that we can find a way to work together on this bill.
Thank you. What I basically said is I have confidence, having worked through this process with the opposition parties for the CERB and the student benefit, that we'll be able to find a way forward with the opposition parties who also recognize that this is an ongoing public health and economic crisis. I think they'll be pleased with the parameters of this program because I believe that the concerns they've raised with our existing programs have been addressed through the changes to this one. I think we don't have to worry about working together when we really need to, and we've shown that time and time again in this Parliament, despite the noise, that we all have the best interests of Canadians at heart.
Thank you, operator. We'll take the next question.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Kim McCroom from the Wall Street Journal. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Can you provide cost estimates for the programs you're announcing today? How much will the additional month of CERB cost? How much will the 3 new programs cost? And how much will the expansion of EI benefits cost?
Thank you for the question. So extending the CERB by an additional 4-week period is estimated to cost approximately $8 billion. Of course, we don't know how many people will be in either of these systems because we, of course, are hoping that as people go back to work, we'll have less people, but we anticipate about an $8 billion cost for the extension of CERB. The 1-year program of the relaxed EI measures coupled with the 3 new benefits is estimated at being approximately $22 billion. And then just overall additional costs to the EI system proper are estimated at being an additional $7 billion. So by my math, and perhaps the finance minister can correct me, I think that's about $37 billion.
And I would just add there, Kim, that as I mentioned in my remarks, by freezing the EI premium rate, we will be foregoing about $2 billion over 2 years that workers and employers would have paid in EI premiums. As I said, we do that very consciously, very intentionally, and we're glad to do it. We think that now is not the time to be discouraging businesses from bringing on new workers. Quite the contrary, we want them to be hiring, and with this action, we're trying to give them a little boost.
Thank you. Follow up?
That's okay. Thanks.
All right, we'll now take questions from the room. David.
On September 23rd, Parliament will come back, and September 27th, legislation costing, $39 billion in total will be tabled, massive overhauls to EI, and I'm assuming you're going to put a gun to the opposition head again to get them to pass this quick with modified rules. To the Deputy Prime Minister, why are you showing such contempt for parliamentarians to put such a package before them, hold a gun to their heads saying Canadians can't get this stuff until you vote in favor of our deal?
Well, thank you for the question, David. And let me first say, I do not believe that putting forward legislation in Parliament should be referred to. I would never refer to it using militaristic metaphors. We are very clearly and with a lot of notice to Canadians and to our counterparts on the other side of the House, laying out what we believe is the right thing to do for Canadians as a government. And I am really confident that the right thing to do is to give all members of Parliament the right to speak for their constituents, to vote in the House, and to say to Canadians, do they support these measures or not? That is a really democratic approach, and that's why we're taking it.
Of course, a really democratic approach would have put legislation before the House for MPs to do that this week. Instead, your government chose to prorogue and eliminating what would have been a good month of healthy debate and discussion by all MPs. Let me ask you a question as the finance minister now. Again, contempt for Parliament by not putting forward a budget for this year before the House. Will you commit to putting a budget before the House before the October 31st and allow that budget be debated in its normal, fulsome manner and be examined by committees? Can you commit to that?
So, David, I have been finance minister for less than 49 hours. And so I am not going to make any grand policy pronouncements today. But let me say one thing clearly to Canadians, that in committing to giving a speech from the throne in a few weeks, our Prime Minister and our government are committing to lay out clearly for Canadians the course of action our government is intending to take, very much including in terms of economic policy. The measures that Carla and I have announced today are a part of that. And we really believe we owe it to Canadians, we owe it to members of Parliament to be clear about our plan and our strategy. This speech from the throne will lay that out, and then all members of Parliament will have a chance to deliver their verdict.
Thank you. Next question.
L'inaudible canadienne. Madame Freeland, sans métaphore
Ms. Freeland, without military metaphors, I would like you to explain. Thank you. Because I don't know any military metaphors. Why didn't you wait to prorogue after September 26th? Why not present these three benefits that need to be passed into law before August 26th? I will respond, and then Carla can perhaps add something afterward. For us, the changes announced today are an integral part of our broader economic strategy and our social strategy. And we believe that it is fair to be clear with Canadians, clear with MPs, and to give them the opportunity to vote in favor or against a plan that would include, obviously, these changes. We're very transparent. We are giving a technical briefing to journalists. Carla explained in detail the changes that we will be proposing. And I hope all MPs, that all Canadians will look at our programs in detail, and I hope that they will support them. Carla. There was a choice today. Either we announce only the 4 additional weeks of CERB, or we give Canadians an idea of the vision and the idea that we would continue to support them after the end of September. We chose to give more details about our plans, even if we cannot legislate them until the end of September, because it is part of our Prime Minister's broader vision. Frankly, the world is not the same as it was 8 months ago. And what we were talking about a year ago is not even in our heads anymore. We want workers to know that we will continue to support them, and that is why we are giving more details today, to give them more certainty. It does not explain why you didn't want to adopt these benefits before proroguing government, because you had the opportunity, but we'll drop that for now. You were criticized a lot about CERB because you couldn't work, well, you had to pay back 50 cents on a dollar. This new benefit, the recovery benefit, is, since it's 50 cents on the dollar, is it an admission that CERB was a mistake? And if I can add one more thing, you're counting on citizens for the 3 new benefits. Do you think that there's a concern of fraud, that they'll be using it fraudulently? Those are a lot of questions. Well, frankly, we believe in the honesty of Canadians. We really think that Canadians want to work. Other parties like the Conservatives think that Canadians would rather stay home, but that's not our opinion of Canadians. We have created a system with CERB that could not have the same nuance of working, well, it clawed back 50 cents on the dollar. We found a way to do so after much work with department officials. So it will be a better system that is closer to EI, but we couldn't do so 2 or 3 months ago, but we can do so now.
And can you just repeat that in English, please?
Sure. I said fundamentally we believe that Canadians are honest and that they want to work. There are other parties who think Canadians would prefer to stay at home, but we think that recent labor market data shows just the opposite. When jobs are available, Canadians will take them because they want to work and provide for their families. When we designed the CERB, it was clunky, and we didn't have systemic capability to have a sophisticated system where we could pull back 50 cents of every dollar earned, and just like in the EI system, but we've managed to create that system moving forward for these new benefits. And it will allow us to not have the $1,000 drop off like we have in the CERB. It will allow us to, it will allow Canadians to work and earn, and it will always be in Canadians' best interest to work, because every dollar they make, they will, they'll have to pay 50 cents up until the point of the maximum benefit they received. But it's very similar to EI. We did our very best in designing the system to parallel the EI system to the extent possible. It's not quite the same, but it's a lot closer and a lot more streamlined than the CERB was.
Rachel Haynes with CTV National News. My first question is about the she-covery, which a lot of people have been talking about over the past couple of months, as we've seen that women are a lot more affected by this pandemic when it comes to their employment. We do have the recovery caregiving benefit, which is likely going to impact women, but there doesn't seem to be any specific measure that is directed right to women in order to address the she-covery. So are there going to be more measures coming to address this and how women are being disproportionately affected, or is it only going to be this caregiving benefit?
Carla and I are both passionate about this. So Rachel, that is a really good question. And you're quite right that the caregiver benefit that Carla has spoken about will be helpful to all caregivers. And the reality is those are predominantly women. Carla also spoke about, and this was a very important point, that maternity and paternity leave, which has been a sore point for people qualifying for EI, that is taken care of in these measures announced today. And I think both of us are very pleased about that, and all Canadians will be. But I want to assure you, this is just the beginning of our focus on supporting women and families in this recovery. So watch this space. There is a lot more to come.
And Minister, do you have?
No, it struck me early on in this pandemic when someone observed that women have been both frontlined and sidelined by this pandemic. And it's really the truth. I think up here you have two senior cabinet ministers absolutely determined to make sure that women come out of this for the better. And we are going to, as a government, definitely continue along that vein moving forward. And as the Deputy Prime Minister said, there's definitely more to come on this regard.
And my next question is about the sickness benefit, which you say fulfills the promise under the Safe Restart Agreement about the 10 days of paid sick leave. Obviously, that is something that the NDP pushed for a lot and something that the government worked for with the NDP. Did you put that in there in order to ensure the NDP support, given that we are in the speech from the throne situation and there might have to be some negotiations played with the opposition parties?
This is a really good idea, one that we've committed to for a long time now, one that the Deputy Prime Minister worked with the provinces on through the Safe Restart, one that was championed by the Premier of my own province and businesses in BC for a long time. There's a general consensus that this is a really good idea and that it helps workers who may be symptomatic or are worried that they might have COVID make their choice to not work a little bit easier. And that's the reason why we're doing it. And we are lucky that there are other politicians that agree with that perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And I would just add, our government has been very clear for a while that we really believe that paid sick leave is important for Canadians, full stop. And it's really important during a global COVID-19 pandemic. As Carla said, I'd like to thank John Horgan of BC for really promoting this, and also Brian Pallister of Manitoba. It's something we agreed on with the premiers and that we committed to as part of the Safe Restart. And as for the NDP, I believe that they are supportive of paid sick leave, and that's great. And I hope all members of the House of Commons will be. There was actually a piece in the Toronto Star, I think it was today, talking about how paid sick leave is an essential part of a country being able to muster an effective response to coronavirus, because only when you have sick leave can people stay home from work. And that we need people to stay home when they are unwell. Otherwise, we will have another huge outbreak. So paid sick leave is the humane thing to do. It's the right thing to do in all circumstances. And it's absolutely essential today for the health and safety of all Canadians.
Thank you. We will take 3 more questions on the phone before returning to the room. Operator, first question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question est de Émilie Bergeron de la
The next question from Émilie Bergeron. You have the floor.
Oui, bonjour. Ma question est pour
Good afternoon. My
Madame
question is for Ms. Qualtrough.
Si j'ai bien compris,
If I properly
pour le
understood,
décompte des 4 millions de
for
personnes
the 4
qui vont passer
million
de la
people
PCU au
who will
nouveau
transition
programme
from
que vous
CERB
annoncez
to
à
the new
l'assurance
programs
emploi,
that you're
il y a 1
announcing,
million de
there
personnes qui
is
vont
1
aller,
million, there are 1
que
million
vous estimez
people
qui vont aller aux nouvelles
who will go
prestations.
on the
Mais
new
si 1
benefit.
million de personnes
But
là,
if
vous parlez
one,
de certitude, comment
if there
peuvent-ils
that many
avoir
people
de
are
la
in uncertainty,
certitude aujourd'hui, ces
how
personnes-là,
can
si
you,
ces 1 million de personnes-là dépendent d'un projet de
if
loi
these
qui n'est même
1
pas
million
encore
people
déposé?
are depending on a bill that has not yet been
Bien
tabled, there's
sûr, nous
uncertainty.
estimons, nous
Of
savons
course,
qu'il y a à peu près
we know that there are
4,5
about
millions de personnes sur la
4.5
PCU
million
maintenant.
people on CERB right now.
Le plus grand nombre de personnes, c'était 8 millions.
The
et nous
largest
avons à
number
peu
of
près
people was 8
4,1
million,
millions de personnes qui
and
sont retournées à leur travail. Alors, c'est de
4.1
bonne nouvelle.
million people have
Maintenant,
returned
nous
to
savons
work.
dans
That's
nos
good news.
systèmes,
We know in our systems that
envers ces 4 millions de
our
personnes qui
system
sont
has 4 million
maintenant
people who are
éligibles, nous
now
avons fait
eligible.
des estimes pour
We
déterminer
did
combien de ces
estimates
personnes
to
avec
determine how many of those people
numéro d'heures additionnelles,
with
soit le
additional
300, soit le
hours, either the 300 or the 480 additional hours, will be eligible for employment insurance. Of course, it's an estimate, but it's the best we can do currently.
Suivi?
Follow-up.
Oui, ça
Yes.
répond pas à ma question. Ma question, c'est
My question is,
qu'est-ce que vous dites à
what do
ces
you
personnes
say to these
qui
people
veulent avoir droit
who
aux
want
prestations de relance
to
que vous
access
annoncez
the
aujourd'hui
recovery benefit
et
that you announced
qui ne
today
savent pas s'ils vont y avoir
and
droit
who
parce que ça
don't know if
nécessite
they'll
un projet de
be
loi
able
qui
to
n'est pas
because they're
encore
depending on a bill that
adopté.
has
Et je vais
not
aller
yet
avec ma
been
relance parce
passed.
que ça, c'était juste une
And
répétition de ma question
this
d'avant.
is just a repeat of
Aussi,
my
ma
question
relance,
before.
c'est
But
les justifications que
the
les personnes vont
justification
devoir fournir
that
aux 2
people will
semaines,
have to
c'est quoi
provide
exactement qu'elles vont
in every
devoir
2 weeks, what
fournir pour
exactly
prouver
is that
qu'elles ont
they'll have to
droit
submit to
à ces
prove that they are
mesures-là?
entitled to these
Et on
measures?
les a vus, les reportages
And we saw
sur
the
des fraudes, des cas de
reports
fraude. Il y a
about
des Canadiens qui se
cases
sont
of
fait
fraud
frauder,
What do you say to Canadians who've had their identities stolen and had people submit for CERB in their names? I know you believe in the honesty of Canadians. What protection will there be in the control measures? Thank you once again for the questions. We are working very hard and closely with the members of other parties to create this new bill that will enshrine the new benefit. We must do it at the end of September. We also have emergency measures that are wrapping up at the end of September as well. So there is work to be done. Concerning fraud, the reason why we chose 2 weeks instead of 4 weeks is that we can follow people more closely. We will ask them to attest that they are available to work and do so much more closely than for employment insurance. We will have integrity measures behind the system. Canada Revenue Agency is ready to follow up with individuals to ensure that the data they are attesting to. So we believe that Canadians are honest, but also we will absolutely go after those who commit fraud. And frankly, the minister in charge of CRA is very committed to this.
Operator, we'll take the next question.
Thank you. The next question is from Kate Belangaro from Bloomberg. Please go ahead.
Hello, my questions are for Minister Freeland. I have a question. Can you tell me if the $37 billion estimate is for 1 year, and if you anticipate the EI changes will be permanent?
Okay, well, that's actually a question in the first instance for Minister Qualtrough, and I'll let her start, but I'm happy to follow up. So the answer to your first question is yes. Again, that will depend on how many Canadians access both the EI system as well as these new benefits, and how quickly and how regularly our economy recovers, which, quite frankly, we don't know. And so part of the reason we're putting in place this 1-year program is to give that assurance to Canadians. In terms of whether or not these changes will be permanent, it's too early to tell, I think, is the answer, the honest answer to that. We're going to look at the EI system, and we know advocates have been, asking governments to make similar changes that we're making temporarily now and making them permanent. But these are really important conversations that we want to have with stakeholders, with businesses, with labor, with workers, with other levels of government. And this is the exact time to be having those conversations.
Follow up, Kate?
Okay, now my question is for Minister Freeland. So Canada has currently cast aside its fiscal anchors, including losing its AAA rating with Fitch. For you as Finance Minister, would it matter if credit agencies downgrade Canada's rating?
So let me be very clear. Canada's economic performance during the economic crisis caused by the coronavirus has been very strong relative to our peers. And that strength has been because Canadians have been great. Canadians have been great about doing the right thing when it comes to responding to the healthcare challenge. And by flattening the curve, by doing the right thing on the coronavirus, we have actually reaped the economic benefit. People sometimes are tempted to talk about how there are trade-offs between doing the right thing for the economy and doing the right thing when it comes to fighting the coronavirus. I think the international experience at this point is really, really clear. If you do the right thing to fight the coronavirus, in the medium term, you are going to have a stronger economy because you're going to flatten the curve and you are going to be able to end the lockdown and go back to work. And that is what we have been doing carefully and cautiously in Canada. Now, in order to be able to fight the coronavirus effectively, we've done something really, really paradoxical. We have asked Canadian workers to stay home, and we have asked Canadian businesses to close their doors. We have asked our economy to shut down. You can't ask people to do that and expect people to do that without providing them support. And so that's what we have done. We have supported Canadians. Our government, yes, has taken on more debt so that Canadians didn't have to take on more debt, and so that Canadians could survive while doing the right thing. Already, we are seeing a positive economic effect from doing that. But as Carla has said, as we hear Theresa Tam saying over and over, the coronavirus is still with us, and we still have to be cautious and careful, and we have to be realistic about the fact that the fight against the coronavirus isn't over. So the commitment that our government can make and will continue to make is that we will do whatever it takes to support Canadian workers, Canadian businesses in doing the right thing on the healthcare front. And as I said, we are already seeing that we are reaping economic benefits from that. Now, when it comes to rating agencies, when it comes to bond markets, when it comes to international investors, the reality is also that in recent months, we have seen an inflow of money into Canada. We have seen a strengthening Canadian dollar. These are not signs of a lack of faith in the Canadian economy, quite the contrary.
Thank you. Operator, we will now take the last question on the phone.
Thank you. Our last question is from Julie Gordon from Reuters. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you, Minister. This is for Minister Freeland. We're talking about 4.2 million people here who remain out of work come September. Does it stay there or continue to fall over the rest of the fiscal year? And we've heard that not all Canadians who lost work will go back. So what's the number you're using as sort of the base, and when do we get there?
Well, thank you for the question. Look, when they swore me in as Minister of Finance, they didn't give me a crystal ball. And, you know, when it comes to our economy, we are certainly living in a time when it is foolhardy to be making predictions. And the reason for that is we simply do not know what course the coronavirus will take in Canada. And even more so, we do not know what course the coronavirus will take in other countries around the world. And as people know very well, Canada is a trading nation. And so to a great extent, we are exposed to how other countries are dealing with this health and economic challenge. What I can say is that the numbers so far in terms of Canadians getting back to work, I think have surprised us all on the upside. And I really want to thank Canadian businesses and thank Canadian workers for getting back to work. Carla has already spoken about the fact that when we put the CERB in place, we were absolutely certain that Canadians would use that benefit out of absolute necessity. And as soon as there were jobs available, we were sure that Canadians want to work and they would go back to work. That is what we are seeing, and we're really, really delighted about that. Having said that, I think we all recognize that the reality is that as long as the coronavirus is with us, we all need to take measures to protect our health and safety that impede a full return to the life we had before the coronavirus. That is having an effect on Canadian businesses. It's having an effect on the Canadian economy. And that means it's having an effect on Canadian jobs. And that's precisely why Carla and I are announcing these measures. I do want to say one other thing about the Canadian economy, which cheers me up a lot. And that is, we do have sectors of our economy, particularly in areas like natural resources, forestry, like agriculture, where it is absolute to continue to work and to continue to operate, even in a socially distanced environment. I talked to my dad about farming. He's turning 76. I'm a little bit worried about his health. And he said, when I'm on my tractor, there's no one within 10 miles of me. I'm really okay. And if people look at our forestry industry right now with softwood lumber prices at historic record highs, there are parts of our economy that are doing really well. And that's fantastic. And I'm really, really grateful to the people, the really smart Canadians who work in those sectors.
Thank you. One follow-up?
Yes, thank you. Follow-up is actually for Minister Qualtrough. What is happening with the student benefit given the extremely high rate of unemployment among young people?
Well, at present time, the student benefit is set to expire in August. So it was a 4-month benefit for students to recognizing that they wouldn't have access to jobs necessarily this summer and that they may not have qualified for the CERB. If students are experiencing job loss or reduced hours because of COVID, they can access the CERB again for the next month. And we are creating tens of thousands of jobs for young people, and we've extended the duration of these job opportunities right through next February, in some cases through next May. So we're working really closely on our student measures. We have $8 billion in play right now in our student package. Super proud of that. But we know students, it's tough for students, and we're going to keep working for them and with them.
Thank you. We'll now take 3 last questions in the room. David? Yeah.
Okay. Hi. I'm just curious. What's the reason you're extending the CERB for another 4 weeks? Is it because of Parliament, and does it have anything to do with that?
A couple of reasons. So first of all, we wanted Canadians to have some certainty and some continuity. We know the uncertainty that September holds for so many Canadians, families, in particular parents and children going back to school or maybe not going back to school. And we also know that some people have continue to have access or serve benefits waiting and still for them. We didn't want to have these benefits overlapping. We wanted to synchronize the transition to EI with the transition to new recovery benefits. We wanted to take the time to get this right. And all those things together meant it just made sense to do this all at the end of September.
Just clarification on that. Nothing to do with the proroguement of Parliament and, okay.
No, not at all.
Okay. And why not implement a universal basic income instead? And then what happens if we see a huge spike in coronavirus cases in the fall, as is quite probable? Will this new program that you're implementing now be able to capture the many Canadians who might have to go back into lockdown?
The answer to your second question is absolutely. And part of the reason we have created a uniform unemployment rate across the country is so that we can have some consistency in Canadians' ability to access EI very quickly. The way it usually works is there's a rolling unemployment rate that's set over a couple of months, and it takes the EI system 2 to 3 months to respond to spikes in unemployment. This way, we've set it for a year. Canadians have a minimum eligibility entry requirements. It's a guaranteed way that if there are outbreaks, as you say, or if there's a second wave, that immediately these systems will be able to take in Canadians who we ask to stay at home again if it comes to that. I'm sorry, I forget your first question. Yes, thank you, UBI. So, I've said this on a number of occasions, but we fundamentally believe that a targeted approach to helping people is better. We can give people more support and more direct support when we hone in on a group of people who need the help the most. So instead of giving every Canadian a little bit of money when every Canadian doesn't necessarily need it, we are focused with these benefits on Canadian workers in particular, and are able to give them more because of that choice, that real targeting of our measures.
Hi, Heather Schofield from the Toronto Star. So you've recognized that there's a conundrum with working parents at home trying to take care of their children and also trying to get back to work or working from home. But your response to that seems to be to give them income support to stay at home as opposed to getting back in the workplace. And why would you choose to go that way? And why not bolster childcare or work with the provinces to get safe schooling open right away rather than waiting weeks and weeks or for more money to get them back into the workforce so that and have their children well taken care of at the same time?
Well, my focus as employment minister has definitely been on working with business, working with provinces and territories, and my colleagues, my other employment ministers on job creation and creating environments for everyone to be able to work. That's obviously, plan A. But the reality is that, women in particular can't go back to work if their kids don't have daycare or preschool or school, especially K to 12. And so we needed, like with the CERB, to have a benefit that covers situations of caregiving, and not just for students or children, pardon me, but if you have a dependent, a senior dependent, and you provide elder care for a parent, if you have a son or daughter who's an adult with a disability that doesn't have access to their day program. These are very complicated situations for a number of Canadians that don't fall within the EI system. We don't have benefits for people in these circumstances, but COVID is creating these circumstances quite significantly, and we needed to have that backstop for everybody, but I'd say women in particular who provide the majority of care. And at the same time, the Deputy Prime Minister is working with provinces on the exact issues you talked about.
Yeah, that is a great question, Heather. And everything Carla says is right. As you know very well, because you've written about it, we have already put significant amounts of money into child care as part of the Safe Restart. But you're right that it is only a beginning and that it is not enough. And I think particularly as we look at back to school, and we look at the possibility that children in some parts of the country won't be back at school all the time, and also that before school and after school programs still face significant challenges. That is something that urgently we as a federal government, working with provincial governments, working with school boards, really need to get our arms around. I can tell you it's the only thing parents on my block are talking about. So I would just say to be continued and watch this space.
Just as a follow-up, the three new benefits that you've set up are $500 compared to the $400 that is the minimum for the enhanced DI. Is that not an invitation to game the system?
Well, to be clear, the recovery benefit is $400 and the caregiving and sickness are $500. So the recovery benefit, which is for job loss, straight out, will be the same as the minimum amount that someone can get in EI. There are some cases where, having done that, someone who's paid into the EI system for years could maybe be at $340 a week or $279, and it wasn't equitable to not give that worker the same amount of benefit as someone who had not paid into the EI system at all.
Thank you. We'll take the last question in the room, please.
Bonjour, c'est une question, surtout peut-être pour la ministre
Hi,
Freeland.
this is a question for
Pourquoi
Minister
est-ce que
Freeland.
Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada en passant?
Laurence from Radio-Canada,
Pourquoi est-ce
by the
que
way.
ce que vous annoncez aujourd'hui,
Why are you
ça marque
announcing
vraiment,
today?
on pourrait dire, une nouvelle étape
Why
du
does this
gouvernement,
represent
de
a
votre
new
gouvernement
step
dans
in
votre
your
lutte contre la COVID?
government's fight against COVID?
Je dirais que
I would say, well, it's not a new step. I would say that it's a continuation of what we've been doing since the beginning.
Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas vraiment de changement?
Well, there's no real change. It's an improvement. It's an adaptation to the new phase that we are currently in. Now, we've started a safe recovery, and in the conditions of recovery, there's the possibility of improving our programs. It's more possible today than it was, say, in April for people to find work. And that's a good thing. And it was necessary to adapt our programs to that. But I really need to say that it's just one step, and we are very aware that we have much more to do. How does this EI reform more fair for workers? And are these new benefits more efficient for relaunching the economy? Well, frankly, the changes to EI are more inclusive. More workers will be able to access EI benefits. The other benefits that we are creating will be more closely tied to the EI system. So we did our best to ensure that the two systems work in parallel, that they are as similar as possible. In the EI system, you can work while on claim, and the same thing applies to the new benefits. The amounts will be the same. So for me as minister, it was very important for there to be fairness for all workers. And we need to have as many workers as possible in the EI system. It is not the perfect system, but it is what we have, and it is much better than a new system that we could create in a few weeks. Yes.
Sure. Let me just think. Sorry. Yeah, basically what I said was we worked really hard to make employment insurance system more inclusive. So the most number of workers we could get into the system, we wanted to pull into the system for some really important reasons. Firstly, because it's the only system we have, and it has some aspects to it that will address the concerns that people had around CERB. Working well on claim, you have to show and prove that you're available for work. The disincentivizing criticisms of CERB don't exist in EI. Access to training, work sharing possibilities, for all of its need for reform, it's way better than any system we can put in place in 3, 4, 5 weeks during a pandemic crisis. At the same time, we wanted to make sure there was equity amongst and between workers who, no matter our best efforts, and even at 120 hours threshold, people still can't get into EI. So we don't want to leave them behind. And so we've created these parallel benefits with a lot of the same characteristics of the EI system. The closest we could get, to be honest, in the time we had to design and develop this to EI, there'll be an aspect of working well on claim, like treatment of earned income, will be able to, because it's a 2-week benefit, monitor more closely people's availability to work. At tax time, we'll be able to verify income and make sure people had the $5,000 they said they earned last year. There's a lot. We've learned a lot from the CERB and from the student benefit, and I think you'll see those things reflected in the design of these new benefits. And I'm very proud of how hard the public service has worked to create this for Canadians.
Thank you. That will end today's press conference.
Les habla Óscar Avendaño de Experience Solutions Canadá. Quiero compartir con ustedes que hemos incluido un nuevo servicio para ti, financiamiento de vehículos nuevos y usados. Sí, escuchaste bien. Enfocados en ti, nuevos inmigrantes, estudiantes internacionales o cualquier residente ya establecido con o sin crédito. Toda situación migratoria será atendido. Por favor, llámanos al 905-920-2143 y comienza a conducir tu carro ahora.